Before we start, if you value survival knowledge earned the hard way rather than sold to you in glossy packaging, subscribe now. This channel exists to preserve the lessons that kept people alive when plans collapsed, radios went silent, and command structures disappeared. What follows is exactly that kind of knowledge. When orders fail, doctrine collapses. Maps are wrong. Timelines break. Units scatter. This has happened in every war, from ancient campaigns to modern conflicts. Yet soldiers didn't simply dissolve into chaos when command vanished. They fell back on something older and far more reliable than orders fieldcraft. These were not optional techniques or specialist tricks. They were survival rules understood so deeply that they overrode written instructions when reality demanded it. The first rule soldiers followed was to stay unseen before staying aggressive. Military manuals have always emphasized movement and firepower, but veterans learned quickly that exposure kills faster than hesitation. In dense forests, deserts, or ruined cities, troops who prioritized concealment survived longer than those who advanced boldly on schedule. When orders demanded movement across exposed ground, soldiers often delayed, rerouted, or slowed their pace to maintain cover. This wasn't insubordination, it was survival logic. Another rule was to control ground contact above all else. Soldiers learned that the earth itself could kill them through cold, moisture, or heat loss. In winter campaigns, men froze not because air temperatures were extreme, but because they sat, slept, or knelt directly on frozen ground. In jungles, rot and infection set in through constant damp contact. Fieldcraft dictated that anything, packs, branches, canvas, even scrap wood, went between the body and the earth. This rule was followed even when rest orders were rushed or shelter was unavailable. Noise discipline was, another rule that overrode orders. Soldiers learned that sound actually travels farther than movement, especially at night. Equipment was taped, metal parts wrapped, and unnecessary items discarded, really regardless of regulation. In many cases, troops violated issued gear standards because rattling buckles or loose tools attracted enemy attention. Water discipline formed another, unbreakable rule. Soldiers were taught to ration water, but experience showed that dehydration destroyed combat effectiveness much faster than hunger. When orders dictated strict rationing, seasoned troops quietly adjusted intake based on workload and heat, sometimes even defying standing instructions. They learned to sip steadily, avoid dry exertion, and whenever possible, source water opportunistically. Civilians often repeat the error of hoarding water instead of managing intake intelligently. History shows that controlled consumption paired with workload management keeps people functional far longer than rigid rationing. Fire discipline followed, really, the same pattern. Fires were rarely forbidden outright, but visible fires could invite disaster. Soldiers learned to build fires that served function without detection. Low flames, shielded embers, or heat reflected inward instead of outward became standard practice. Even when cold demanded warmth, fire was used sparingly and, tactically. Movement timing became another fieldcraft rule that superseded orders. Soldiers learned not to move simply because a schedule demanded it. Instead, they moved when terrain, light, and fatigue aligned in their favor. Dawn and dusk were, generally favored. Midday heat or deep night exhaustion were avoided whenever possible. When orders demanded immediate movement under poor conditions, experienced soldiers would slow down, stage their movement, or wait for terrain advantages. Load management was a quiet but critical rule. Soldiers discarded non-essential equipment even when regulations forbade it. Excess weight caused fatigue, noise, and injury. Fieldcraft dictated that only what supported immediate survival and mobility mattered. Everything else became expendable. Modern survival culture often celebrates overloaded kits, but, history shows that the most effective survivors carried less, not more, and adjusted loads continuously based on conditions. Finally, soldiers followed the rule of self-reliance within the group. Orders assumed coordination, supply, and support. Fieldcraft assumed isolation. Soldiers learned to operate as if resupply would never come and reinforcement was unlikely. They shared knowledge, rotated responsibilities, and maintained skills individually rather than depending on systems. This mindset kept units functional when command disappeared. It remains, I think, one of the most valuable survival lessons history offers. These Fieldcraft rules were not written in bold print. They were learned through exposure, loss, and repetition. Soldiers who ignored them rarely lasted long enough to argue doctrine. Those who followed them survived long enough to pass them on. If you want more of these hard lessons history paid for in blood and cold nights, subscribe to Strange History and share this video with anyone who still believes survival comes from orders, gear lists, or instructions alone. History tells a different story, and it's one worth remembering.